So you are the co-founder of Holition, which is a very successful creative and tech studio. You've been able to work with some dream clients from Rolls-Royce to Louis Vuitton to Gucci and others. A lot of people that listen to this podcast, they are perhaps at an earlier stage in building their business, and they'd love to have clients and make sales into businesses like those. Let's start with advice on getting clients and making sales and winning accounts like those. What tips would you have for those that are struggling to bring on new business?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back in many ways to the job that I had. I mean, I think I'm quite lucky in that I've been around the block a few times, and I had a sort of semi-career before I got into creating a startup or building up a startup. And I guess so I was a marketing director for luxury, and marketing is all about trying to carve out that niche, that no one else is occupying, and owning that space. And so a lot of what I did when we started Holition was to try and get that positioning right. Firstly. Secondly, recognizing that we knew a lot about luxury, but we didn't know an awful lot about technology. Understanding that the customers that we were looking to get access to, which were those luxury brands, working out what their problems were. And the problems, this sounds really bizarre because Holition is whatever we are now, 18 years old or 19 years old, something along those lines. Although it feels like a startup, we're clearly beyond that kind of startup phase. But when we started up, the brands, the kind of brand names that you were talking about there, they didn't even recognize digital. Digital was not even a thing. And it wasn't that they were just ambivalent about digital, they were sort of antagonistic towards it. And everything was about product, and everything was about being able to pick things up and try things on, and craftsmanship and heritage. And digital was just too impersonal a channel to talk about these things. So some of the clients had websites, but many didn't. And if they did have a website, it was really about the location of the store, the opening hours, and the telephone number to call, so that you can go book an appointment and buy an actual product. So recognizing that, a lot of what we did was, I guess, adopt a strategy of trying to educate and trying to support. And there's a lot of hand-holding, and there was a lot of going in and talking about opportunities. And also, and I think, I don't want to underestimate this, I think we've done a very good job of making quite senior people in luxury feel awkward and feel like they're being left behind. Sure. In an area where perhaps they worked in luxury all of their lives, they felt they had a huge amount of strength and knowledge in the luxury space, but digital drove a truck through all of that. So I think we were quite good at prodding them quietly and saying, by the way, have you seen what Burberry's doing? Or have you checked out what Gucci's doing? They're stealing a march on you. By the way, we can help you. That kind of thing worked well. So I guess to kind of tie all that together, really, really understand who you are, really understand who your clients are, and just try and find those little ways of getting in there that are different to everybody else. I mean, we, quite a lot of sort of, let's call them competitors. I don't think there is a competitor to us. I think we're so sort of broad and potentially sort of unusual in our remit. But a lot of people would naturally pitch in with tech, saying, I've got this piece of tech, or I can do that, or I've got an algorithm. And by the way, I know it's great because I was working with Warner Brothers yesterday, and I was doing something with toothbrushes the day before. And it's all about the tech. We very early on took a stance of saying it's not about the tech. Yeah. Actually, it's about strategy, understanding you, your tone of voice, your personality, thinking creatively about how to unlock that strategy, and then almost the technology self-selected itself at the end. And that played really well to brands who were thinking, I don't understand any of this, but I do understand strategy. I can appreciate creative ideas. And these guys say they've got the tech to deliver it. We immediately got the conversation into areas where they felt comfortable. Whereas I think the tech crew were deliberately trying to take the conversation into areas where they felt uncomfortable.
Sure, which technical people often do, don't they? Because it's all about logic. Yeah. They forget emotion. They forget the personalities involved.
Yeah, and I think also, I again, it'll probably come out more, but I think part of me being a marketing director is I've always deliberately messed about with the DNA of what we are. Yeah. Whereas most technology companies or creative technology companies or studios or whatever you want to call them, most of them have been sort of trained into the kind of 10-second elevator pitch. Yeah. The snappy "who are you?" So we deliberately took the opposite view, which is like we have no idea who we are, what we are. We only know who we are by the last project that we did, and we'll know who we will be in 6 months' time by the next project that we do. And that was very different, I think. That sort of idea, and it also cued that thought of like, well, the world's changing, the world's shifting, and we don't have a widget. And actually, all of these brands invest so much blood and treasure in differentiation. Yeah. Actually, rather than just sell multiples of the same thing to every single brand, we'll treat you as individuals. And I think that worked really well for us. I mean, understand what your clients understand and appreciate, and that was more that creative side. So that's where we sort of pushed.
Cool. You talked about brand a few times then, which is one of the most important things when trying to make sales. The University of Arts London described you as the Willy Wonka of technology. Okay, I don't know if you cringe when you hear that, but I think that's really cool personally.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually the University of Arts picked it up because they very kindly, generously, or somewhat worryingly, gave me an honorary doctorate a few years back. But that was one of the things that the Chancellor mentioned at the inauguration or the handover. But actually, it was the Financial Times many years before that first noted it. Yeah. And I think part of that was, well, I know they didn't call me, they called us, but it got hung around my neck. But what was nice, I mean, it was very nice when they talked about it, because it absolutely plays to that idea of using technology in creative ways. Not deliberately pushing the creative, basically thinking about technology as an entirely new palette of tools that creative people can use to do interesting things. In the same way that artists use brushes and can chisel and paint, we could use technology to create interesting things. And in the early days, we were doing, I mean, it sounds bizarre to even talk about it now, but we created the first ever use of augmented reality on the body. Yes. To try stuff on. And initially it was sort of things like watches, and the FT looked at it and just couldn't get their mind around the idea that you can try a watch on that doesn't exist. Yeah. But we also very quickly started to move into somewhat unusual other spaces. So, for example, just after just before the article was written, we had shown them a piece of work that we'd done at London Fashion Week in collaboration with fantastic friend of the studio, Lauren Boker from The Unseen. We created a dress that was worn on the catwalk at Fashion Week that scanned the mind of the wearer in real time and use that data to understand mood and emotion, and then completely change the colours and the patterns of the dress according to how you feel. And again, I don't think the Financial Times, that was used to stocks, shares and company valuations, could really get their brains around it. I'm not sure we could get our brains around it either. It was a great fun project. But I think that's why that sort of was mentioned. And I have to say that kind of notion has definitely propelled Holition forward. We've definitely had a number of different personalities, and it's something that we keep talking about, this idea of humanizing technology, creating experiences that actually play to the human. I'm a big fan of technology that helps us understand ourselves or our role in a place or our society, or gets people into the conversation. So when you look at our very, very disparate website, you'll see sort of projects for brands that I think are still very creative and very interesting, and many of them are very, very clever under the hood. But then dripped into that, you'll see sort of more art or cultural based products that tackle issues that as humans of Holition, we are deeply passionate about ourselves, and that could be projects that we've done for United Nations around the movement of refugees, projects that we've done around dementia, projects that we've done around rape and genocide in Rwanda, at the Guggenheim in Bilbao. The work that we do for brands generates cash, and as a founder, I can choose how we invest that cash. I mean, I could invest it in a vicarage and a Maserati, or I could invest it in things that play to why I did this in the first place, which is to create something called Holition that becomes a vehicle to explore.
Brand that you've developed is really cool, right? And having major publications and universities call you the Willy Wonka of technology, even though it wasn't something that you coined yourself, right? It's nice to have that recognition from other people. What advice would you give to people on building a brand? We've talked about sales, we've talked about being different, we've talked about having a USP. Branding is connected, but it is slightly different. How does one go about creating something which is special in the marketplace?
So again, I mean, it goes, I mean, for me, everything is about differentiation. So that's we've spoken about that, but really finding a unique niche. I see lots and lots of startups that are trying to sort of sit in an area where there are lots of other companies already kind of doing stuff. And by the way, you can survive in that, but you've got to be better and faster, and cheaper to kind of thrive. So for us, it was and when we mentor other companies, we urge them to try and find that unique space. So I think that's one area that's important. I think another area that we found, or I've personally found very important, is to be very, very adaptive. Now, my previous career was in luxury, and in luxury, every single step that we took, we very, very carefully and thoroughly reconnoitred the ground upon which we were going to place that foot. And we moved forward slowly but surely in a very, very sort of careful way that ultimately got us to the right direction. I sort of naively assumed when I started Holition that good, clear clarity of thought would allow us to shape our future. And I very, very quickly realized that actually a startup is equivalent to tumbling down a hill, utterly out of control. Yeah. And I guess one of the things that I found very useful was to accept that. Yeah. And to recognize that actually water runs downhill in a variety of different ways, impelled by gravity, but it will get to the bottom. And it's not so much that you have to take one route rather than another. You can take whatever route you want, as long as actually it's going to achieve your goal. So, it's, to paraphrase atrociously incorrectly, the Chinese proverb about bending with the wind. You have to be able to bend with the wind. And I've seen so many companies stand up tall to the onslaught and then snap. And I think you've got to be a really, really special person to be able to say, my way is right, everyone else is wrong, and I'm going to stick by my gun. You've got to be Steve Jobs or someone along those lines. You've got to, and that, by the way, that means you've probably not got too many friends, and you're quite a difficult, tough character to kind of swim against the flow. So I think that bit, again, we found very important, and that means being reactive too. That means always keeping an eye open for the next opportunity and not being afraid. I mean, people talk about pivots. Yeah, pivot's one thing, but I think pivot's quite a gentle phrase for some of the lunges that we've kind of made. And then the only other thing, I mean, there's lots of things we can talk about, but I think another thing that I found very, very important is saving cash. I know it sounds so bizarre, it sounds so obvious. I mean, I'm absolutely fixated on cash flow. I'm more fixated on cash flow than sales. Cash flow is obviously a byproduct of sales. If you've got no sales, you've got no cash flow. But there were a couple of times, particularly early on, that we very nearly went out of business because we were too successful. And we had too much money going out.
Spending too quickly.
Growing too quickly, having the work, but having very bad payment terms. And having customers that paid late. Yes. And so I'm absolutely, fixated on that now, particularly as I get older. I think when you do that, I mean, it sounds a bit Scrooge-like, doesn't it? But I can remember, mentoring a startup at Techstars. They were really cool, and they wanted to raise £120,000. And I remember saying to them, why do you want to raise £120,000? And one of the reasons is they wanted a new website, and they needed a creative director, and creative directors were £80,000, and this kind of stuff. And I was absolutely shocked and horrified, because when we started Holition, we had no logo, we had no website, we had nothing at all. And what we would do is ring up the London College of Fashion or Central St Martin's and say, can we talk to your graphics design course on innovation and technology, and at the end of it, can we offer all of your students like the chance to design our logo, and we'll give everybody £10, and whoever wins will give £100 in cash there and then. Yes. And then can we talk to a coding school, and we'll take a couple of interns, and in the end, and as a result of that, can they build us a website? And that's kind of how we did it. And I think, and by the way, that's fun. It's really fun coming from luxury, where everything was about TV shoots and creative directors, and the higher up in luxury I got, the less actual making I was doing. The chance to roll my sleeves up, make my team a cup of coffee, buy them a beer, build things on set, design things. I mean, it was a real second lease of life. I loved it. Yeah, still love it. It's fun still doing it.
The scrappy grittiness of running a business that way, which I'm used to because I'm bootstrapped. It's very different to raising a few million and spending it on just wasting 90% of it, right?
Yeah, and making sure the beer's stocked, the fridge is stocked with beer. By the way, those things are important. I'm not denigrating the fridge stocked with beer, but
you had a pub around the corner from your first office, and that was like your second meeting home.
It was, very good. So yes, so as we started to kind of grow, we started to push out of our office, and there's a famous pub, which is called the Mitre down in the alley, and they had a kind of a room, and they knew us so well that we'd just ring them up and we'd book out that room. We'd have board meetings there, but we'd also use it as a creative breakout. Yeah. And I think, this comes down to, again, I hope we're known as a creative studio. And again, how do we foster creativity? And as a studio, we're very, very multidisciplinary. We've got lots of very different skills. Yeah. And how do we and by the way, each of those skills are very different, and they don't automatically blend. They don't automatically sort of work together. A mathematician often doesn't work with a filmmaker, or a psychologist won't necessarily work with a data scientist, or an anthropologist won't necessarily work typically with an artist. So how do we do that? And we found, it sounds mad, doesn't it? But the pub became a very important part of that. And 2 or 3 nights a week, there'd be little gangs of people drifting down to talk about projects. And, serendipity occurs. I love that sort of moment when, I get a brief from, Chanel, and I can chuck it into a room with a mathematician, a front-end developer, and a data scientist, and a graphic designer. And what comes out is like wrong, completely wrong. But because I work in luxury, I can maneuver that idea onto where I think the kind of delineation or the parameter of Chanel's sort of appetite for innovation lies, and we can sort of get work that way. And I think, and one more thing about the universities is almost still pretty well 100% we recruit. So the humans of Holition come straight from university. Okay. And that might mean that they come to us aged 27 with a PhD in computer science, or 22 with an MA in fashion psychology from London College of Fashion. But another kind of, not rigid rule, but a kind of another rule that I laid down quite early on was I didn't want people from luxury fashion and beauty working for me, because I didn't really want anybody that had been sort of, and this is really unfair, but preconditioned by large scary brands to say no. Whereas all the boys and girls that work for me, they're all full of ideas, and we try, and my job is to make sure that there are no kind of no mechanisms in place to diminish that, where everybody can say whatever they want and come up with ideas, and then together we'll work. We'll build off each other's ideas, and we'll end up in this great space where a great project for a client hopefully emerges. Sure.
One thing that I'm curious about is, as well as running your business, you have a lot of other side projects. You are the visiting professor at the University of Arts London. You've been a mentor for Techstars. You've previously been a mentor for the British School of Fashion, for the British Fashion Council, the Tate Art Galleries. I love the Tate, by the way. Yeah. How do you deal with time management, and how do you get all of that done and not like completely fail at everything? Because I would struggle.
Well, I'm not saying I succeed, but I guess there's a couple of things there. So one is, obviously I've got a very good team. And there's not a lot of hierarchy. So I've got I've got a management team. There are heads of departments. But not particularly big, but I trust them completely implicitly. But also we've got very, very good boys and girls. So first of all, I know that I can disappear off an afternoon, and all of that's going to work. So that's important. And then obviously, if there are important things going on, Holition takes priority. But what I very quickly found is, and I'm sure everybody's the same, right? You need. Well, I definitely need a yang to the yin. I need alternatives, and it was because I was feeling stifled and pressured and constrained by a career in luxury that I needed to do something myself. And once the cork was out the bottle and the genie was roaming wild and free, I really enjoyed the liberation. So that's kind of one thing. I think the second thing is, certainly and I imagine most people, we're all about ideas, and I feel very privileged to have met 1 or 2 people in my life who I think you could say are genuine geniuses. We talked about Elon Musk. We talked about, I'm talking about Lee McQueen. People I didn't meet Steve Jobs. He must have been extraordinary. They have this kind of, I was going to say they have this aura about them, but unfortunately, poor Alexander McQueen, Lee McQueen, he didn't have that confidence, and that was one of the issues. But they are extraordinary people. But the rest of us mere mortals, we get through life, or we create by that magical moment when 2 people come together and have a third idea that they wouldn't have had between them. And that's how mankind crawled out of the primordial ooze. And I'm big believers in that. That's why we are this multidisciplinary studio where different people of different backgrounds can come together and create. I'm the same. So I need to be able to talk to London College of Fashion. I need to be able to talk to students. I just like talking to people, and a lot of the ideas that we have come from those. I'll like all of us. You'll take something, you'll join it to something else, and then something else will come along, and that kind of thing is interesting.
Yeah. That's what creativity is, right? Combining different ideas from different sectors in new and unique ways. You're not inventing anything new.
No.
You're just combining the old into newish ways of doing
repackaging it a bit. And actually, maybe that's another answer to the very first question you asked me about, like, what do you do when you start a business?
Yeah.
You need to have a few stories.
Yes.
You need to be able to create those stories. And and part of the narrative, the input are those collaborations that I do, or the artists that I meet, or the organisations that I can get involved with. I think that's a really important part of it. And then the only other advice I would give, which we did right at the beginning, and I'm sure this is happening for everybody now, but every single opportunity to speak, we took. No matter what it was, where it was, whether it was paid or whether it wasn't, whether it was raining, sunny, whether it was like the UK packaging show, didn't really matter what it was.
Yeah.
Every single opportunity to speak, I encourage my team to do the same. We always turn up and speak. Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is, a bit like, basically, your story, you don't just kind of tell it. It builds a bit like that broom in Only Fools and Horses with 28 handles. And basically it's like my great aunt's stew. It's constantly being added to, and there's nothing better at forcing you to tell that, to recognize, to work out what that story is, than the pressure of standing up on stage in front of several hundred complete strangers and talking about what you do. And so the preparation for that gets you thinking about who you are, what you do, what are the stories, what works, what doesn't. And then you just carry that through. It changes and it evolves over time. But I've got one deck that every conference I do, it's the same deck.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's never it's now a very different deck from when I first did it, but it's the same deck.
Yes.
Few things added, few things taken away every year.
Cool. I love that.